I have had a project on my mind for a while. I've been wanting to upgrade my Mauser masters I used for making molds. This has been my master for probably close to 15 years. This is an older Denix. This one is a much older one. It's a little bit different than the one I have here to my right, but I've had this for a very, very long time. Basically, the Denix Mauser, as far as doing like Star Wars DL44s, if you want to make a metal one, this is pretty much your best option for a frame to build a DL44. The size is really accurate, and it works well as a master for resin copies, which is what I use it for. But it's not perfect. It's got a few things that you can do that are pretty much all aesthetic things, and I want to do a few things to this to make it look a little more accurate. Really, there's no real problem with using just regular Denix the way they are without modifying them, but I think it's time that I modify mine. I think I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Now, I've already torn this down. Since this has been cast, I cast silicone molds using this. Everything is pressure. Everything I do is pressure cast. So this has been cast dozens of times, maybe over 20 times. When you pressure cast, you mount this in a box and you pour your silicone in and then apply pressure to help force out any air bubbles and make sure all the voids are filled and everything. As a result of that, this was completely full of silicone. You couldn't move the trigger, couldn't move the slide, you couldn't do anything. It was completely gummed up. So I took this apart last night, cleaned it out, and I really wanted to make sure I could make it function again as intended. As you can see, there's a bolt on the end with some big flat washers. This is how it's mounted into the mold box. Since it's kind of a weighty piece, it has some weight to it. Mounting it with a nut and bolt, you can't put a little hot glue on it and hope it'll stay. It's pretty heavy, so I bolt mine down. So I'm going to remove that. As far as prop replication and whatnot goes, the ideal thing to get is a real gun or original to what was used in the film or whatever you're trying to replicate. Now, there is a replica Mauser out there that actually shows up in the Star Wars movies, and that is a Mauser replica made by a company called the Model Gun Corporation. Those are like the holy grail. They're very rare, and when you do find them, they are very expensive. This Denix, it's not very expensive. You can find these for less than $100, and they're readily available. You can pick these up all day long at a decent price. So that's what makes them one of the better, or probably the best platform for DL44s. But like I said before, it's missing a few things that I would like to add, and I would like to change a few things about it also. One thing I would like to change about it is the bolt here does not have an extractor on it. On Mausers, there is an extractor on the top of the bolt, and you can see it. Also, the bottom plate here, this is the mag well. This plate here, you can see a little line right along here, but it should have an indentation here with a plunger that you would depress to remove the magwell cover, and this is how you would get the feeder springs out of the magwell. I'm gonna add that feature also, and those are the two main things I want to change that are obvious things. Now, I have two of these. This is my original. This is one I've had for years, and here's a new Denix that's a little bit different, very similar, same weight, same construction, but they changed the sight. Unlike on this one, it will slide forward and for elevation adjustment. That no longer moves. Some of the casting is a little bit different. This older one used to have the Denix logo right here, which I had removed. But this one here doesn't have the logo, but it has Denix made in Spain stamped into the side right here. So that's one of the differences. This one has no made in Spain or Denix markings besides the one that I removed here. So I'm going to start with this one right here. The plan with this one is to totally disassemble it. I'm going to eventually convert this to a hognose Mauser to become the master for my A&H Hero, my ESB Stunt, and the Mearsun Power 5. That's what would be on this frame. And this one here will keep a standard barrel, but it will be the master for the A&H Grido Killer, the ESB Hoth and Bespin, and the Return of the Jedi DL44 Hero also. So both of these are going to be, they're going to get the same treatment, and this one's going to go a little bit further and become a bullnose. I've done a lot of research on the Mauser. A lot of parts on this are case hardened parts, and a lot of your case hardened parts will have a different appearance. Even though these are going to be cast and that appearance is not going to translate into the castings I make from these, I would still like to go ahead and replicate that look. The trigger, I've already had this sanded the trigger. I want to see what it looked like sanded. The triggers are hardened. The bolt is a hardened piece. So I'm going to go through and modify these two Denix to appear more like an actual Mauser. Oh, one other thing I want to do, probably about a dozen things I really want to do to these, but another one thing that always stands out on a lot of old Mausers, especially the turn of the century and World War I era and pre-World War II era, is they are a little bit rougher than what you would find on modern weapons and later Mauser versions also. These recessed areas here, you'll actually notice kind of raw tooling marks. The upper surfaces are faced fairly well and refined, but down in the recesses around here and around this spot right here and up down in here, there are some very raw tooling marks. I think I'm going to chuck this up in the mill and run a light pass in all these recess areas to simulate, or actually not really simulate, where I'm actually going to put those tooling marks into the body of the gun, the frame of the gun. So first off, I'm going to tear this down. I'm going to take it down to nothing, take it down to all of its individual parts. And what I'm going to need for that is a small punch. I got a little mallet here and a flathead screwdriver. First off, I am going to remove the upper assembly right here. First, I'll start with this flathead screw right down here in the front. Remove that. Then I'm going to take my punch, and there are two pins. There's a pin right here and a pin right here. This is not just one single pin. It's actually two separate pins. And when you knock one through, it'll actually start hitting the other, but sometimes they don't hit exactly together, but we're going to knock one pin, use one pin to knock the other pin out. Ah, there we go. So we got one pin coming out the backside. Keep knocking it out. And the other pin will be captured inside the housing. And I'm going to try to knock it back through. I'm missing it now, so I'll knock this one back in. All right, there we go. Oh, there we go. It came right apart. Get this pin out of here. Now this piece here, actually what it does is that piece keeps the sear down in here. This right here is the trigger sear. You can see as I pull the trigger, it moves. That is what locks the hammer back and allows the hammer to fire forward. And this piece right here keeps the sear in the proper position. If this wasn't here, the sear would just end up popping all the way vertical and not actually engaging the hammer at all. And how I know this is I forgot to put this in the last time I rebuilt it, and it didn't work. So there's that piece. Move on to taking the trigger out. Pull the pin, and out comes the trigger. And here's the trigger spring. We'll also keep that right there. Next up is the hammer. There we go. Get the pin out, and we'll pull the punch out, and out comes the hammer. You can see right there is the hammer spring. Take that, we'll put that right aside here also. Now, let's pull the grips off real quick. So there we go, there's a completely stripped down frame. So that's all ready for us to start working on. Up next, let's pop the sight out. This sight's fairly old and kind of, obviously you can see it's very loose. And I'm going to tighten that up when we put this back together after we do all our changes and modifications. Set the screwdriver under here again. Actually, I'll turn it this way. There we go. There's that pin. And off goes the sight. Now, all that's left is the bolt. Now, this is the trickiest thing, and I realize I need to get one more tool. Now, here we go. Now, this is just, now all that's left is just the bolt. And if you look, this is the hardest part to take apart. And how this is done is there is a rod driven through here. Actually, when this is assembled, there's a spring inside the bolt right here, and a rod goes in, and the rod is pressed in right here. The rod goes through this lug. So this lug is what the spring is working against. There's the rod right there. If you can see it, there's the rod running right there. So what you need to do is spring it open, take a pair of, these are flat pliers, reach in, grab the rod, hold it tight, just like so, and then tap on the bolt while you're holding the rod. There we go. See that pop up right there? All right, now that will allow us to remove this pin and also allow us to remove this lug. Push that forward and then just kind of wiggle it out. There we go. Now, out comes the bolt. And here's the spring. Get that removed also. There we go. All right, here we go. Now this is all of the pieces. This is the entire Denix broom handle Mauser replica, all completely disassembled. Here's your trigger, your housing, your two grips, the hammer, the takedown lug, the bolt, the upper receiver or the upper carrier, rear sight. We're not going to do anything to this piece right here, so I'm going to put that in a little container. We're not doing anything with the lug, but we don't need the grips. That out of the way. We won't need this piece. This piece won't be doing any modifications to this piece. The lug, along with the bolts and the trigger, these guys are all going to get sanded smooth, and we're going to simulate a heat treating on them. And also the bolt is going to be tooled. The top of it's going to be machined out to accept a faux extractor. What I am going to do on the upper is I might play around with the sights area, but one thing I am going to do is on most of your older Mausers, you will see, if you look in this area right here where this lug is, there's a wear pattern from tearing it down, and it wears and mars pretty badly right here. And I am going to add that wearing. You can see a little bit right here from it, but it's really usually worn down on a lot of them, especially older ones that have been used heavily. It's worn down a lot, and I'm going to add some of that wear pattern right there. Another thing I am going to do is I am going to go around and clean up some of the parting lines that are on these molds. For example, on this piece here, there's a nice sharp piece right here and a mold line going all the way down it. I'm actually going to sand all that off, and I'm also going to do the same thing with the bolt. There's more evidence of the mold line for this piece on the bottom than there is on the top, so I'm not going to worry about that. And where it's visible in this area, it's covered up by the front sight, so that's another area I'm not really going to mess with. On this, probably the first thing I'll do is do the tooling in the recessed areas. I'm going to start on the older one, the older Mauser, or the older Denix first. I'm going to do everything to the old one first, but I'm going to do them together. So this one's going to be done, and this one will be done right afterwards. Once it's set up to do this, and I've figured out how to do it, and I did it correctly, then I'll do it on this one. But this is also going to be torn down, just like this one. These two are both going to be torn down. There's just no reason to go over stripping this down since you've already seen it with this one. I'm not even going to worry about taking this one apart. You've already seen that, but I'm going to work up a game plan, figure out what things I need to do first. I have a few things I need to figure out. I want to do some things with the sight. I just don't know how to pull it off yet. There's a few things going on with the sight that I want to change. With the way it's constructed, it might be difficult or maybe even impossible to do without totally remaking the sight. But first off, I'm probably going to sand all these parts, the lug, the hammer, the trigger, and the bolt, sand these down and get them smooth. I want them very, very smooth. And then on the lower section, it's obviously going to have the tooling done in the lower recesses. I might also add some detail in this flat area in the back. There's a lot going on here on the real Mausers. I think it would look good if I could actually figure that out and figure out a way to get some of that detail in here also. So this ought to be a fun project, and I can't wait to get it done because I'm getting close to needing new molds for my Mausers, and it would be awesome to have the next set of molds cast from these upgraded Denix Mausers. So this ought to be fun and give me a chance to try some new things out on the milling machine and also the lathe to get this ready for a bullnose barrel. I will be turning this barrel down on the lathe, and I also will be creating the replacement bullnose barrel also on the lathe. So we're going to get this one tore down, get all the parts separated, and come up with a plan of action. Until then, I'll see you next time.